In the world of royal protocol, where every step is measured and every gesture carries centuries of tradition, one moment of human instinct can shatter everything. When Princess Anne's life hung in the balance during a terrifying kidnapping attempt in 1974, a single police officer made a split-second decision that would defy every rule in the Royal Protection Handbook. What happened next would not only save a princess, but reveal the true character of a future king who wasn't even on the throne yet. This is the untold story of courage, protocol, and a royal response that left everyone speechless. The streets of London had seen many things, but nothing quite like what unfolded on that March evening when duty collided with humanity, and one man's choice to break every rule would echo through the corridors of Buckingham Palace for decades to come. What King Charles did in response would prove that sometimes the most powerful reactions come not from anger, but from unexpected grace. The evening of March 20th, 1974, began like any other for Princess Anne. The 23-year-old royal had just finished attending a charity film premiere at the Odeon Cinema in Leicester Square, one of many official engagements that filled her busy schedule. Known for her no-nonsense attitude and fierce independence, and had always been different from other members of the royal family. While her brothers basked in media attention, she preferred action over words, substance over ceremony. As her Rolls-Royce pulled away from the cinema, Princess Anne sat beside her husband Captain Mark Phillips, whom she had married just 4 months earlier. The newlyweds were still adjusting to their life together, balancing royal duties with their shared passion for equestrian sports, and had already made a name for herself as an accomplished rider, and the 1976 Olympics in Montreal were on the horizon. Life seemed to be falling into place perfectly. Inspector James Beaton sat in the front passenger seat, his trained eyes constantly scanning the streets around them. As Princess Anne's personal protection officer, Beaton had been with the royal family for several years. He understood the delicate balance required in his role, remaining invisible yet vigilant, respectful yet ready to act at a moment's notice. The 31-year-old officer had come up through the ranks of the Metropolitan Police, earning his position through dedication and spotless record. The royal protection protocols were strict and well-established. Every route was planned in advance, every potential threat assessed, every contingency prepared for. The rules were clear about maintaining distance, about when to intervene, and about the chain of command that governed every decision. These protocols had been developed over decades, refined through experience, and designed to protect both the royal family and their protectors from unnecessary risk. What nobody could have anticipated was how quickly everything would change. The Rolls-Royce made its way through the familiar streets of central London, heading toward Buckingham Palace. Traffic moved at its usual pace. Nothing seemed unusual or threatening. Chauffeur Alex Callender navigated the vehicle with the practiced ease of someone who had driven these routes countless times before. The conversation inside the car was light, casual talk between the royal couple about the evening's event and their plans for the following day. Then, without warning, their world exploded into chaos. A white Ford Escort suddenly swerved in front of the royal car, forcing Callender to brake hard. Before anyone could process what was happening, a tall man with dark hair jumped out of the Ford, a pistol clearly visible in his hand. The man's movements were deliberate, calculated. This was not a random act of road rage or a simple robbery gone wrong. Inspector Beaton's training kicked in immediately. Years of preparation condensed into split seconds of decision-making. The protocol was clear. In case of an attack, the protection officer's primary duty was to shield the royal family member and call for backup. The standard procedure involved creating distance between the threat and the protected person, using whatever defensive measures necessary while waiting for additional security to arrive. But as the gunman approached the vehicle with clear intent, Beaton realized that following standard protocol might not be enough. The man was moving too quickly, his weapon was already drawn, and backup was minutes away at best. In that crucial moment, Inspector Beaton made a decision that would haunt him for years to come. He chose to abandon protocol entirely. Instead of staying with Princess Anne, waiting for the situation to resolve itself, Beaton threw open the car door and stepped directly into the path of danger. The gunman, later identified as Ian Ball, had already proven his desperation by opening fire on the royal vehicle. The sound of gunshots shattered the evening air, transforming an ordinary London street into a battlefield. Ball had planned this attack for months. A 26-year-old with a history of mental illness, he harbored delusions about forcing social change through dramatic action. His plan was simple but terrifying: kidnap Princess and demand a ransom of £3 million, which he intended to give to charity. In his disturbed mind, this act would somehow make him a hero rather than a criminal. The gunman's first shots hit the royal vehicle, spiderwebbing the bulletproof glass, but not penetrating it completely. Calendar, the chauffeur, was struck in the chest but managed to maintain consciousness. The sound of gunfire brought immediate attention from pedestrians and nearby motorists, but most people were too shocked to react effectively. Inspector Beaton found himself facing a choice that no amount of training could have fully prepared him for. The standard response would have been to remain in the vehicle, use it as cover, and coordinate with other security personnel. But Ball was already at the car window, trying to force Princess and out of the vehicle. Every second of delay increased the likelihood that the princess would be successfully kidnapped or worse. Without hesitation, Beaton launched himself at Ball, physically tackling the gunman in full view of the gathering crowd. The two men struggled violently, fighting for control of the weapon while Princess watched in horror from inside the vehicle. Mark Phillips immediately moved to shield his wife, positioning himself between her and the car window where the struggle was taking place. The fight between Beaton and Ball was brief but intense. Both men knew that the outcome of their struggle would determine the fate of one of Britain's most prominent royal family members. Ball, driven by desperation and mental instability, fought with the strength of someone who had nothing left to lose. Beaton, trained and experienced but also motivated by a deep sense of duty, matched him blow for blow. During the struggle, Ball managed to shoot Inspector Beaton in the shoulder, but the officer refused to release his grip on the gunman. The pain was immediate and severe, but Beaton's military training and police experience had taught him to function through injury. He continued to grapple with Ball, preventing him from returning his attention to the royal vehicle. The scene attracted more attention as seconds passed. Several civilians began to approach, some trying to help, while others simply stood and stared at the unprecedented spectacle. Police sirens could be heard in the distance, but they seemed impossibly far away given the urgency of the situation unfolding in real time. Ball's plan was falling apart rapidly. What was supposed to have been a quick and efficient kidnapping had turned into a prolonged public struggle with an injured but determined police officer. The gunman's mental state, already fragile, began to deteriorate further under the pressure of the moment. He fired several more shots wildly, hitting a passing taxi and narrowly missing several pedestrians who had stopped to watch the drama unfold. Princess, trapped in the back seat of the damaged vehicle, found herself in a position that no member of the royal family had ever experienced. Throughout her life, she had been protected by layers of security, protocol, and carefully managed public appearances. Now she was witnessing firsthand the very real dangers that her protection officers faced every day to keep her safe. Captain Mark Phillips attempted to coordinate their escape from the vehicle, but Ball's erratic behavior and continued presence made any movement extremely dangerous. The couple remained low in their seats, following the emergency procedures they had been taught, while the battle for their safety played out just feet away from them. Inspector Beaton's decision to physically confront Ball directly violated numerous protocols and procedures. Royal protection officers were trained to minimize their own exposure to danger whenever possible, to call for backup before engaging threats, and to prioritize creating distance between the royal family member and any potential harm. By throwing himself directly into combat with an armed and unstable individual, Beaton had broken nearly every rule in the Royal Protection Handbook. Yet as the struggle continued, it became increasingly clear that his unconventional response might be the only thing standing between Princess and a fate that would have shocked the world. The inspector's willingness to sacrifice his own safety for hers embodied the very spirit of royal protection, even if his methods flew in the face of established procedure. The crowd of onlookers continued to grow as word of the attack spread through the immediate area. Some people began taking photographs, others called for police assistance, and a few brave souls considered intervening directly. The surreal nature of the situation, a real-time attack on a member of the royal family playing out on a busy London street, left most witnesses struggling to process what they were seeing. As the evening descended into chaos, none of the participants could have anticipated how this moment would be remembered, discussed, and analyzed for decades to come. The immediate focus was simply survival, but the implications of Inspector Beaton's choice to break protocol would reverberate through the highest levels of British society, eventually reaching the future king himself. The sounds of the struggle between Inspector Beaton and Ian Ball echoed through the London street as more people became aware of the unfolding crisis. What had started as a quiet evening was rapidly becoming one of the most significant security incidents in modern royal history. Despite his shoulder wound, Beaton maintained his grip on Ball, preventing the gunman from returning his focus to the royal vehicle where Princess and Captain Phillips remained trapped. The first civilian to truly understand the gravity of the situation was Ronald Russell, a former boxer who happened to be walking nearby when the attack began. Russell had initially thought he was witnessing a simple street fight, but the sound of gunshots and the sight of the royal vehicle made the reality clear. Without hesitation, the burly man moved toward the struggle, his boxing experience giving him the confidence to engage in physical confrontation. Russell's intervention proved crucial. As Ball and Beaton continued to grapple for control of the weapon, Russell approached from behind and grabbed Ball around the neck, attempting to subdue him through a chokehold. The addition of a second opponent further disrupted Ball's plans and gave Beaton a momentary advantage in their struggle for the pistol. However, Ball's desperation and mental instability made him unpredictable and dangerous. Even with two men restraining him, he continued to fight violently, managing to fire several more shots in random directions. One bullet struck a nearby building, sending chunks of concrete flying and further endangering the growing crowd of onlookers who seemed unable to comprehend the need to move to safety. Princess Anne, watching the battle from inside the damaged vehicle, later described feeling completely helpless for the first time in her life. Throughout her royal upbringing, she had been taught to maintain composure in all situations, to project calm confidence regardless of circumstances. But witnessing Inspector Beaton bleeding and fighting for her safety while she could do nothing to help created an emotional impact that would stay with her for decades. Captain Phillips attempted to maneuver his wife away from the window where the struggle was taking place, but the confined space of the vehicle and the ongoing danger outside limited their options. The couple pressed themselves against the far side of the car, trying to present as small a target as possible while remaining ready to escape if an opportunity presented itself. The arrival of Police Constable Michael Hills marked another turning point in the developing crisis. Hills had been patrolling nearby when he heard the gunshots and rushed toward the sound. Unlike the civilians who had responded instinctively, Hills had formal training in handling armed suspects and crisis situations. However, nothing in his experience had prepared him for dealing with an active attack on a member of the royal family. Hills assessed the situation quickly, recognizing that both Beaton and Russell were injured but still actively restraining the gunman. Rather than waiting for additional backup, the constable made his own decision to ignore standard protocol. Instead of establishing a perimeter and calling for armed response teams, Hills threw himself directly into the struggle, adding his strength to the effort to subdue Ball. The 3-on-1 confrontation finally began to turn decisively against Ball. Despite his desperation and the weapon in his hand, he could not effectively fight three determined men simultaneously. The combination of Beaton's training, Russell's boxing experience, and Hill's police techniques gradually wore down the gunman's resistance. But Ball's surrender was not immediate or complete. Even as the three men pinned him to the ground, he continued to struggle and attempt to use his weapon. The pistol fired several more times during the final moments of the struggle, with bullets striking parked cars and shop windows nearby. The random nature of these final shots created additional danger for the dozens of people who had gathered to watch the unprecedented spectacle. The sound of approaching sirens grew louder as additional police units responded to the emergency calls that had flooded the Metropolitan Police Communications Center. Within minutes, the quiet street was transformed into a chaos of flashing lights, shouting officers, and emergency personnel trying to assess and secure the scene of the attack. Inspector Beaton, despite his gunshot wound and the adrenaline coursing through his system, maintained his focus on Princess and safety until the very moment that backup arrived. Only when he was absolutely certain that additional officers had secured Ball and established control over the scene did he allow medical personnel to examine his injuries. The shoulder wound, while painful and bleeding heavily, had fortunately missed major arteries and bones. Beaton would require surgery and several weeks of recovery, but he would make a full physical recovery from the attack. The psychological impact, however, would prove more complicated and long-lasting. As Ball was finally handcuffed and removed from the scene, the full scope of his plan became clear. Police discovered that he had been stalking Princess and for several months, studying her schedule and looking for opportunities to carry out his kidnapping scheme. His choice of location and timing showed disturbing levels of planning and preparation. The investigation revealed that Ball had obtained his weapon through illegal channels and had practiced his approach repeatedly in the weeks leading up to the attack. His mental health history included several instances of concerning behavior, but nothing that had risen to the level of formal police intervention prior to the kidnapping attempt. Princess and Captain Phillips were immediately escorted to safety by the arriving police units, but not before the Princess insisted on speaking personally with Inspector Beaton. Despite the chaos around them and the ongoing security concerns, she approached her injured protection officer to express her gratitude for his actions. This moment, witnessed by several police officers and civilians, would later become a crucial element in understanding the full impact of the incident. Princess Anne's genuine emotion and obvious concern for Beaton's welfare demonstrated the personal relationship that existed between members of the royal family and their protection officers, a bond that went far beyond the formal requirements of their professional roles. The medical examination of Beaton's wounds revealed the full extent of his sacrifice. In addition to the gunshot wound to his shoulder, he had sustained numerous cuts and bruises during the struggle with Ball. His uniform was torn and blood-stained, physical evidence of the violent confrontation that had saved Princess Anne from kidnapping or worse. Ronald Russell, the civilian who had spontaneously joined the fight, was also treated for minor injuries sustained during the struggle. His decision to intervene, despite having no formal training or legal obligation to do so, exemplified the kind of spontaneous heroism that emerges during crisis situations. Police Constable Hills suffered bruises and cuts but no serious injuries. His choice to abandon standard protocol and join the physical confrontation with Ball would later become a subject of intense discussion within police training circles, as instructors struggled to balance the need for following procedures with the reality of unique situations that demand immediate action. The crime scene investigation that followed revealed additional details about Ball's planning and intentions. His vehicle contained materials that suggested he had prepared for the possibility of holding Princess Anne captive for an extended period. The discovery of rope, tape, and other restraining devices painted a disturbing picture of what might have happened if his plan had succeeded. Ball's interrogation revealed the depth of his delusions and the twisted logic that had driven him to attempt such a brazen crime. His stated intention to give any ransom money to charity did little to mitigate the serious nature of his actions or the trauma he had caused to his victims. As news of the attack began to spread through official channels, the challenge of managing public information became apparent. The royal family's press office worked closely with police authorities to control the release of details while ensuring that accurate information reached the public before rumors and speculation could take hold. The immediate aftermath of the attack saw Princess Anne and Captain Phillips taken to a secure location where they could be medically examined and debriefed about their experience. Both were physically unharmed, but the psychological impact of witnessing such violence and feeling completely vulnerable would require time and support to process fully. Inspector Beaton was transported to hospital for surgery on his shoulder wound, but his primary concern remained the breach of protocol that his actions represented. Despite having likely saved Princess Anne from kidnapping, Beaton worried that his decision to abandon standard procedures would result in disciplinary action or even termination from his position. The three men who had fought to protect Princess and Beaton, Russell, and Hills became instant heroes in the eyes of the public. But within official circles, questions were already being raised about proper procedures and whether the outcome justified the risks that had been taken. The hours following the attack on Princess and saw Buckingham Palace transformed into a crisis management center as senior officials, security experts, and members of the royal family grappled with the implications of what had occurred. The incident represented the most serious breach of royal security in living memory, and every aspect of the protection protocols would need to be examined and potentially redesigned. Queen Elizabeth II received news of the attack within minutes of its conclusion, as emergency communication protocols ensured that any threat to a senior royal family member was immediately reported to the highest levels. The Queen's initial reaction focused entirely on the welfare of her daughter and the brave individuals who had risked their lives to protect her. However, the monarch also understood that this incident would have far-reaching consequences for royal security arrangements across the entire family. Prince Charles, who was 25 years old at the time and not yet married, learned of his sister's ordeal while attending an official function in another part of London. His immediate response was to cancel his remaining engagements and return to Buckingham Palace, where he could be briefed on the situation and see his sister in person to confirm that she was truly unharmed. The relationship between Charles and Anne had always been complex, shaped by their positions in the line of succession and their very different personalities. Charles, as the heir to the throne, lived under constant scrutiny and pressure, while Anne had developed a reputation for being more direct and practical in her approach to royal duties. Despite occasional tensions, the siblings shared a deep bond rooted in their unique understanding of the burdens and responsibilities that came with their birth. Charles's reaction to news of the attack revealed a side of his character that was not often visible to the public. Behind the formal exterior and careful public speeches was a man who cared deeply about his family's safety and well-being. The thought that his sister had come so close to serious harm or death affected him profoundly, and his response would reflect this emotional impact. In the hospital where Inspector Beaton was recovering from surgery, the wounded protection officer found himself at the center of unprecedented attention. Senior police officials, royal security coordinators, and government representatives all wanted to debrief him about the incident and understand exactly how the attack had unfolded. However, Beaton remained most concerned about the potential consequences of his decision to abandon established protocols. The royal protection protocols that Beaton had violated were not arbitrary rules, but carefully developed procedures based on decades of experience and analysis. The standard response to an armed attack was designed to minimize risk to both the protected individual and the protection officers themselves. By engaging Ball directly in physical combat, Beaton had exposed himself to significant danger and potentially created additional complications for other security personnel responding to the crisis. Yet as the investigation into the incident continued, it became increasingly clear that Beaton's unconventional response had likely prevented a successful kidnapping. Ball's planning had been extensive and his determination absolute. The few seconds it would have taken for Beaton to follow standard protocol and call for backup might have been enough for Ball to extract Princess Anne from the vehicle and disappear into London's complex street system. Princess Anne herself insisted on visiting Inspector Beaton in the hospital as soon as her own medical examination and security debriefing were complete. This decision created additional security concerns, as moving a royal family member to a public hospital so soon after an attack required extensive coordination and protection measures. The princess's visit to Beaton's bedside was deeply personal and emotional. She expressed her gratitude not just for his actions during the attack, but for his willingness to risk his career and his life to protect her, and had always prided herself on treating the people who worked for her with respect and consideration. But this situation transcended normal professional relationships. During their conversation, Princess and learned more about Beaton's concerns regarding the protocol violations and the potential impact on his career. She was shocked to discover that the man who had saved her life was worried about disciplinary action from his superiors. This revelation would prove to be crucial in shaping her own response to the incident and her subsequent advocacy for the protection officers. The media coverage of the attack created additional complications for everyone involved. While the royal family's press office worked to control the narrative and protect the privacy of those involved, the dramatic nature of the incident made it impossible to keep details from becoming public knowledge. Newspaper headlines proclaimed Beaton, Russell, and Hills as heroes, but they also raised uncomfortable questions about security procedures and royal vulnerability. Public opinion overwhelmingly supported the actions of the three men who had fought to protect Princess but within official circles, the response was more complicated. Some security experts argued that Beaton's decision to engage Ball directly had been reckless and could have resulted in additional casualties or even the death of the princess herself if the situation had developed differently. Others contended that the unique circumstances of the attack had demanded an immediate response that went beyond standard procedures. The debate highlighted a fundamental tension in security work between following established protocols and adapting to unprecedented situations that those protocols might not adequately address. Prince Philip, known for his direct manner and military background, was among the first senior royals to publicly defend Inspector Beaton's actions. The Duke of Edinburgh understood from personal experience the split-second decisions that could determine life and death in dangerous situations. His support for Beaton helped establish the tone for the royal family's official response to the incident. As the days passed and more details of the attack became public, the heroism of the three men who had subdued Ball became a source of national pride. The fact that a police officer had been willing to sacrifice his own safety to protect a royal family member, and that ordinary civilians had joined the fight without hesitation, seemed to embody the best qualities of British character and values. However, the incident also raised serious questions about the adequacy of royal protection measures. If a mentally unstable individual acting alone could come so close to successfully kidnapping a senior royal family member, what did this say about the overall security arrangements that were supposed to prevent such attacks? The internal investigation conducted by the Metropolitan Police and Royal Protection Services would eventually result in significant changes to protocols and procedures. New emphasis was placed on threat assessment, route planning, and the coordination between different levels of security personnel. The incident served as a wake-up call that prompted a comprehensive review of all royal protection arrangements. Inspector Beaton's recovery progressed well, but he remained deeply concerned about his professional future. Despite the public acclaim for his actions, he understood that he had violated fundamental principles of royal protection work. The question of whether heroism could justify insubordination would need to be answered at the highest levels of both the police and royal establishments. The investigation into Ian Ball revealed the extent to which mental health issues had contributed to the attack. Ball's history included multiple instances of concerning behavior, but the systems in place to identify and treat individuals who posed potential threats had clearly failed. This aspect of the incident would eventually lead to discussions about improving mental health services and threat assessment capabilities. As the immediate crisis passed and normal routines began to resume, the long-term implications of the attack became clearer. The incident had demonstrated both the dedication of royal protection officers and the limitations of existing security measures. More importantly, it had created a situation where the response of senior royals would be closely watched and judged. Prince Charles found himself in a particularly interesting position. As the heir to the throne, his reaction to the incident would be seen as indicative of his character and his approach to leadership. The young prince understood that his response could set important precedents for how the royal family dealt with the people who risked their lives in service to the crown. The stage was set for a decision that would reveal much about Charles's personal values and his vision for the future of the monarchy. How he chose to respond to Inspector Beaton's protocol-breaking heroism would be remembered long after the immediate details of the attack had faded from public memory. The investigation into the attack on Princess and had been ongoing for 3 weeks when Prince Charles made an unexpected request that surprised everyone involved. Rather than relying solely on official reports and briefings, the future king asked to meet personally with Inspector Beaton to hear his account of the incident firsthand. This request was unusual, as members of the royal family typically maintained formal distance from operational security matters. Charles's desire for a personal meeting reflected his deep concern about the implications of the attack and his recognition that Beaton's actions deserved more than routine administrative review. The prince understood that the inspector's decision to break protocol had potentially saved his sister's life, but he also wanted to understand the human dimension of that choice and its consequences. The meeting was arranged to take place at Clarence House, Prince Charles's official residence, rather than in the more formal setting of Buckingham Palace. This choice of venue was deliberate, intended to create an atmosphere that would encourage honest conversation rather than formal testimony. Charles wanted to understand not just what had happened during the attack, but why Beaton had chosen to act as he did and how he felt about the aftermath. Inspector Beaton approached the meeting with considerable anxiety. Despite his years of service protecting royal family members, he had rarely had extended personal conversations with any of them. The formal protocols that governed royal protection work typically maintained clear boundaries between the protectors and the protected, ensuring that professional relationships remained focused on security rather than personal connections. Moreover, Beaton remained uncertain about his professional future. While the public had hailed him as a hero, the internal investigation into his actions was still ongoing. Some of his superiors had suggested that his decision to abandon protocol, however well-intentioned, had created unnecessary risks and set a dangerous precedent for other protection officers. When the two men finally met, Charles immediately set a tone that was both formal enough to acknowledge their respective positions and informal enough to encourage genuine communication. The prince thanked Beaton for his service and his sacrifice, but then asked more probing questions about the decision-making process during those crucial moments of the attack. Beaton explained his thought process during the attack with the careful precision of a trained police officer. He described how the standard protocols would have required him to remain with Princess and while calling for backup, but how the immediate threat posed by Ball had seemed to demand more direct intervention. The inspector acknowledged that his decision had been instinctive rather than calculated, driven by his assessment that waiting for additional help would have given Ball the opportunity to succeed in his kidnapping attempt. Charles listened carefully to Beaton's account, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly allowing the inspector to tell his story completely. The prince was particularly interested in the moments when Beaton had to choose between following his training and following his instincts, understanding that this tension represented a fundamental challenge in protection work. As the conversation continued, it became clear that Beaton's concerns extended beyond his own career prospects. He worried that the attention focused on his protocol violations might undermine confidence in the royal protection system as a whole. If protection officers began to believe that following established procedures was less important than taking dramatic individual action, the entire security framework could be compromised. Charles found himself deeply impressed by Beaton's thoughtful analysis of the situation and his continued commitment to the principles of royal protection work, even when those principles might work against his own interests. The inspector's willingness to accept potential punishment for his actions, while maintaining that he would make the same choice again if faced with similar circumstances, demonstrated exactly the kind of character and judgment that Charles valued. The prince also learned more about the personal cost that Beaton and his family had paid since the attack. While the inspector was recovering well from his physical injuries, the psychological impact of the incident and the uncertainty about his future had created stress for his wife and children. The media attention, while generally positive, had disrupted their normal life and created security concerns for the family. During their conversation, Charles also discussed the broader implications of the attack for royal security arrangements. He acknowledged that the incident had exposed vulnerabilities in existing protocols and that changes would be necessary to prevent similar situations in the future. However, he also emphasized that these improvements should build upon the dedication and professionalism that officers like Beaton demonstrated rather than undermining their authority to make critical decisions in dangerous situations. The meeting lasted much longer than originally planned, as both men found value in the opportunity for direct communication about issues that were typically handled through formal channels and written reports. Charles asked Beaton about his recommendations for improving protection protocols, recognizing that someone who had actually faced an armed attack might have insights that desk-bound security planners would miss. Beaton's suggestions were practical and based on his real experience of the attack. He recommended enhanced training for protection officers in hand-to-hand combat situations, better coordination with local police forces, and more flexible protocols that would allow officers to adapt their responses to unexpected circumstances. Most importantly, he argued for clear support from senior officials for officers who made good-faith decisions in crisis situations, even when those decisions involved departing from standard procedures. Charles found Beaton's recommendations compelling and indicated that he would personally ensure they received serious consideration from the appropriate authorities. The prince also made it clear that he viewed Beaton's actions during the attack as exemplary rather than problematic, regardless of any protocol violations that might have been involved. Near the end of their meeting, Charles made a statement that would prove to be crucial for Beaton's future. The prince declared that anyone who had risked their life to protect a member of his family deserved the full support and gratitude of the royal household, not criticism or punishment for technical violations of procedure. This position would carry significant weight in the ongoing investigation and deliberations about Beaton's fate. The prince also expressed his personal appreciation for Beaton's service in terms that went far beyond formal courtesy. Charles made it clear that he understood the magnitude of the inspector's sacrifice, and that this understanding would influence his own approach to royal protection matters in the future. The conversation established a level of mutual respect and understanding that would have lasting implications. As news of the private meeting between Prince Charles and Inspector Beaton became known within official circles, it sent a clear message about the prince's priorities and values. Senior police officials and government representatives understood that any action taken against Beaton would be viewed unfavorably by the future king, whose opinion carried considerable weight in matters affecting the royal family. The meeting also demonstrated Charles's hands-on approach to issues that affected his family's security and well-being. Rather than simply accepting briefings and reports from others, the prince had taken the initiative to gather information directly and form his own judgments about the situation. This approach would become a hallmark of his leadership style in the years that followed. Princess Anne learned about her brother's meeting with Inspector Beaton and was deeply moved by Charles's decision to personally intervene on behalf of the man who had saved her life. The incident had strengthened the bond between the siblings and demonstrated Charles's loyalty to those who served his family with distinction. The private conversation between Charles and Beaton had lasted nearly 2 hours, far longer than anyone had expected. By the end of their meeting, both men had gained new insights into their respective roles and responsibilities. Charles had developed a deeper appreciation for the sacrifices made by royal protection officers, while Beaton had gained confidence that his actions would ultimately be judged fairly. As Beaton left Clarence House, he carried with him not just the prince's expressed gratitude, but also a clear indication that his career would not be damaged by his decision to break protocol in defense of Princess Anne. The meeting had effectively resolved the central question about whether heroism could justify insubordination, with Charles providing a definitive answer through his personal support for the inspector's actions. The official response to Inspector Beaton's actions came just 2 weeks after his private meeting with Prince Charles, and it stunned everyone who had been following the investigation. Rather than facing disciplinary action for violating royal protection protocols, Beaton was to be awarded the George Medal, one of Britain's highest honors for civilian gallantry. The announcement came directly from Buckingham Palace, with a statement that praised his exceptional courage and devotion to duty in circumstances of extreme danger. The decision to honor rather than punish Beaton sent shockwaves through both the police establishment and royal protection services. Many senior officials had expected that protocol violations would result in some form of disciplinary action, regardless of the positive outcome. The George Medal represented not just recognition of Beaton's heroism, but a fundamental statement about the values that should guide royal protection work. Prince Charles's influence on this decision was unmistakable, though palace officials were careful to present it as a collective judgment.